Welcome. This is Panda Consulting's workshops, and specifically, this is the Parcel Fabric workshop. And I'm Frank Conkling. And today in this workshop, what we're going to do is we're going to start at the core fundamentals. What is the Parcel Fabric? How is it structured? How is it implemented? How do you handle multiple editors? Those sorts of things. So we sometimes get into some very advanced topics here. Now we're going to go back to the fundamentals. All right. And that's what we're going to cover today. So before we get started, I just want to make sure that everyone knows who Panda Consulting is. We are, in fact, a professional services firm. We've been in existence for about 23, almost 24 years now. And we have our website here. And if you want to find out who we are, how we do things, why we do things, those sorts of things, please go out there and look at that. We also have on our website an events page. That events page will allow you to go and look and see what's coming up, what workshops are coming up, where we're going to be as far as any in-person conferences and such, and what workshops we're going to have on those. If you're looking for something a little bit more detailed, if you go over to the workshops and events, it actually will give you a list of what they are, including on those. If you scroll down a little bit, there's links to all the previous ones that we've done, in which you can actually go and find the videos. There's two links on the videos on this page. One is to our YouTube channel. The other one is to an actual download of the entire original recording. So YouTube goes and decompresses or compresses up the video and makes it standard definition. Sometimes we will have high definition copies of the video on this page. And then finally, we actually have on here, if you go further down on that workshops area, you'll see that we do have a YouTube page. And on the YouTube page, we have the recording of everything we've been doing for the last couple of years. There's probably 70 different topics and workshops that we have up there, and we have them dated, what we went over on here, and you'll find everything from ArcGIS Pro, sort of fundamentals of Pro, to the Parcel Fabric, to things such as story maps and Arcade and different tools that are inside of here. So hopefully you'll find it beneficial. These videos, they're anywhere from 35 minutes to about an hour and a half. So they're not short videos, but in fact, we do go in depth into everything that we do. So hopefully you'll get a chance to go out to our YouTube page, subscribe, that way you'll know every time we go and put something new up there. All right, let's talk about the Parcel Fabric structure. By the way, let's just start by saying, if you have a question or a comment, you'd like me to talk about something, please go ahead and put something up in the chat window. While we don't have a moderator today, I have the chat window up over here so I can see when something pops up, and I will go and make sure that we address all your concerns, that we answer any questions that you might have in here. All right. So first question is the Parcel Fabric. What is the Parcel Fabric and such? So it is a structure that Esri has developed, and this is through years of watching and listening to those of us that do nothing but parcel maps. What is it that we're concerned with? What are we looking for? How do we use things? Those sorts of things. What types of tools are we needing? And this is a result of 40 years of Esri doing everything from COGO editing to the various different solutions they came up with all along the way. This right now is the cutting edge of parcel maintenance on here. And there are some people in here who aren't data modelers. I personally am a data model, so I look at this, I'm like, I get excited about this. But to explain what this means that in fact, what we have here is we have a parcel fabric. This is an object. This is a programming object which goes and keeps track of things that are happening in different areas of your data set. All right. And that Parcel Fabric goes and uses a polygon feature class called a record polygon feature class. And that polygon feature class is an organizing structure. And everything gets tied to that record so that everything associated with what could be considered a transaction will get tied to a record. I don't know whether we'll explore it in depth today, but we definitely are going to either today or at the next Parcel Fabric workshop, we'll be exploring records really in depth and what you can do and how they work, those sorts of things. I'll at least introduce the concept today to you though. So a record is a polygon, and the record controls everything. So if you're going to go and work within the Parcel Fabric, you want to make sure you understand this concept of records and how they work. And associated with a record, part of the record is things such as the lines that make up the individual polygons, the individual parcels, the polygons themselves for those, the points that are associated with that. And then there's connection lines. So let's talk real quickly about what is a parcel, all right? Because we want to make sure we define a parcel before we go any further. Because a parcel is a specific definition of things. A parcel is actually an area that's defined. All right, that area is usually defined by a legal description of some sort. If we're dealing with, for example, tax parcels, it's got a legal description associated with it. But in order to go and help to memorialize or document the information about that area, we also have another feature class, a line feature class. Now that line feature class actually goes and stores information about the lines that were used to create that parcel. So for example, if we used coordinate geometry, it goes and stores that COGO values on that line feature class. If we went and did something as far as entering COGO, it actually stores whether or not those lines were entered, those COGO values were entered or inversed or calculated from geometry, or whether they were manipulated in some way after that. It also, on this line feature class, it stores information about whether or not any of the information stored in the description had to be adjusted, had to be rotated or scaled up or down to fit into our parcels. One of the givens is that because of both the historic and archival purposes of parcels, the descriptions rarely exactly match what either you have mapped or what you are trying to fit it into. So you want to make sure that you find some way with parcels of determining what sort of difference or variance there is between the actual record information or the deed information and what's actually mapped out there. And then finally, we have points. Those points actually represent the corners of the lines, the endpoints of the lines, at least within the GIS they do. But in real life, they'll represent monuments that are placed out in the real physical world. And as we start getting deeper and deeper, we may actually start looking at putting and attributing those points of what they represent and where they were called out. They also can go and represent survey monuments that might have been collected. So these are control points. Those control points are handled inside the Parcel Fabric, in that it allows us to go and have points that we are very positive about where these things are located, and we don't want to move them. So again, the Parcel Fabric structure itself is a very complex structure. While it's simplified a little bit from previous iterations, it is still a complex structure that tracks a lot of things that are very, very important to a parcel mapper or to a cadastralist. And again, the record understands what points what lines, what polygons were used to create that overall record. Now, to help the mapper control and analyze that, we also have a series of rules that are associated with these parcels. The first set of rules is the topology rules. And these are the sort of standard types of topology rules that we've been using for decades since topology was initially introduced in here. But there's been some slight variations on it. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. In addition to that, there are this concept of attribute rules. Attribute rules are rules that allow the software, once it's set up correctly, to go and perform certain functions for the mapper. So the mapper doesn't have to do everything. Things such as automatically calculating the area. If in fact you go and split a parcel, how is that area calculated? Because sometimes you have a deed acreage versus an actual mapped acreage, and you might want to go and split that deed acreage to represent so much of this deed was taken out of the split. An attribute rule will go ahead and perform that calculation. You can get very complex and have attribute rules that also go and check to see that certain things occur, that in fact, the parcel identifier that you put in there matches what your standard is inside of your organization. So an attribute rule can be used to go and not just make sure that things are calculated, but make sure that things are correct. And then finally, we have this thing called error features. An error feature is something that's generated and something that results from one of the rules being in conflict, not necessarily being followed. It could be a topology rule, or it can be an attribute rule that's not being followed, and it will result in an error feature that allows you to go back and fix this. So this structure consists of an object, a programming object, which goes and watches what you're doing when you have an active record. And that record serves as this coordinating feature, and it keeps track of things that are created and deleted. And it keeps track of connection lines and points and lines and polygons, all of them keeping the information that you as a parcel mapper really need to keep track of. All right. So let's go to the first element on here. Let's actually go to real data. Let's look at some real data in here. So this is an organization's Parcel Fabric, and it consists of a series of lines. There's in fact this Parcel Fabric over here in the table of contents, and here's the record polygon table. And we could actually open this up, and it is a standard table. Nothing different about it. This is a standard polygon feature class in here, and it keeps track of everything, the number of parcels associated with that one record, whether or not any of them have been retired, when it was created, that sort of information. Also, there's these dirty areas. These are the error features, and these are popped up as you go and look and validate and check those errors on here. And this is all grouped together in a table of contents, and that's called a Parcel Fabric grouping. All right. The next thing we have is we have that point feature class. Now that point feature class actually is broken down as far as what type of point that is, whether or not it's a point that's associated with a parcel. In other words, these points here, if you look at the symbology, this is a good active current point right now. If in fact I had a control point that was set that this is a control point, I know what the coordinate values are on this point, and I never wanted to move, never ever wanted to move, I could set it as a constraint or a control point, and that point would not be allowed to be moved in any way. All right, so that's a control point or a constraint point. There's a regular point. If in fact I take a point and I delete all of those things that are associated with that point doesn't disappear. That point actually becomes a retired point. And you can see there's actually different symbology for a retired point. So those are the points. Every element on here should have a point, and we're going to talk about the rules regarding points on here. However, recognize that there's two different types of lines that are associated with this. If I go to a line feature class here and I say, let's go ahead and I am editing. So let's go and go to my create. If I look at lines, there's actually, this is the multi-point line. This is the polyline of old that we used to have in shape files and these other things. And then there's also a 2-point line or a COGO line on here. The Parcel Fabric handles both of those. So if you have a natural boundary, a waterway, that sort of thing, you can define that waterway by using a polyline, and it will not require all sorts of short little lines in there. It can use a polyline to define that natural boundary. Or if in fact you have lines that are really defined by distances and bearings, you can use a 2-point line to define those. It uses both. You don't have to decide one or the other. All right. There's also something called a construction line. These construction lines are intending to be lines that don't necessarily define the boundary of the parcel, but they are used to help determine where a parcel is or to give it internal integrity. And this is often things like the line that goes from, in a meets and bounds description, that goes from a point of commencement to the point of beginning. That really isn't part of the parcel necessary. It's part of the definition of where that parcel is. So it's not a parcel boundary line, it's a connection line, which tells you sort of and sort of documents what was included in that meets and bounds description. All right, that's a connection line inside of here. So let's look at the table. Let's look over at catalog here and see what a parcel fabric structure actually looks like and how it works. The first thing we want to recognize is that because we have topology associated with a parcel fabric, all topology has to exist within a feature data set. A feature data set inside of a geodatabase is a group of feature classes that share exactly the same spatial reference, domain, and precision. They are exactly the same projection, exactly the same precision, and exactly the same domain. They can all be shared inside of a feature data set. And once you have them inside of a feature data set, the software then understands, okay, I can begin to start comparing the coordinates from one feature class to the coordinates of another one when I start evaluating topology. So in order to have topology, you need a feature data set, and inside of a geodatabase, a parcel fabric always exists inside of a feature data set. So let's move down here a little bit and look at this blue object. If I look at it in our catalog, I see that this is a parcel fabric. There's an object there that's actually going to start tracking everything that I do inside of here. So let's explore that parcel fabric a little bit more, that object and what it does. The first thing we look at is okay, where is it stored? It's stored inside of this geodatabase. And then if we pull down the parcel fabric, it gives us a lot of information about that. When was it created? More importantly, this version number. what is the version number on here? Because as Esri has been developing the Parcel Fabric, they've recognized that there's structures that have to be in place and are no longer needed, those sorts of things. So it's important to make sure that your version matches the software that you're using to edit it so that it has exactly the same structure or the needed structure. It also has inside of here, what is the compatible release for this? Matter of fact, let's look over here. Before we look in here, here's the versions. So version number 1 of the Parcel Fabric, the first release, you had to use ArcGIS Pro 2.4. And if you were doing an enterprise deployment, it had to go and use ArcGIS Enterprise 10.7.1. And you can see there's been several iterations on here. Release 2, which is really the first release that people started deploying. You needed 2.5, and the enterprise had to be 10.8. Release 3 was where people really started deploying it. You would use some variant of 2.6, ArcGIS Pro, and then the enterprise was at 10.8.1. That's required. And then release 4 is 2.7 and 2.8, and that required 10.9. And we are currently at release 5, which will be 2.9, and ArcGIS Pro 3.0 will also use the same version, and that will work on 10.9.1 and Enterprise 11.0. All right, so they're trying to stretch out and make sure that it fits the exact same release and that you can hold on to these versions for longer periods of time. Question I often get is that, well, why can't I use 2.9 against a release 2? And especially as it relates to server deployments or ArcGIS Enterprise deployments. And the reality is that there's a lot of code, a lot of application code, business rules, if you will, that's written to the server on here, that if you try to use 2.9 and it goes and makes a new call for some of the new functionality against an older server, that older server will not understand what that command is. And it will wind up usually either giving you an error or just not working at all on there. So it really is not only the best practice, but really strongly recommended that you maintain the same sort of structure. You use the correct ArcGIS Pro release with the correct release of both your enterprise and the Parcel Fabric. So what about if I have a file geodatabase instead of an enterprise geodatabase? Can I use 2.9 against a file geodatabase? And the answer is, it's a little bit more flexible, but there might be structures, feature classes, adjustment features, those sorts of things that are required by 2.9 that may not be in the previous Parcel Fabric version. So it's always a good practice, just sort of stay along that same line wherever you're at and do that. One final question before we move this is that often I'll get asked, well, 2.6 was out. What about 2.6.2 or 2.6.8? The answer is yes, you can stay in that main family. You know, those first 2 digits, 2.6, whatever, you can stay anywhere within there and feel that you're very, very safe with this. All right. Let's go back for a minute on deployment. There is 2 ways to go and deploy the Parcel Fabric. If you only have one person editing that Parcel Fabric, you can go with a file geodatabase. This is the easiest deployment that's out there. And if you only have one parcel editor, by all means, start out here. Start out with a file geodatabase. It's simpler to set up the structure. It's simpler to go and do the training. It's simpler to edit. However, if you have multiple people editing on here, you have to go to an enterprise deployment, which uses the ArcGIS Enterprise Portal to go and serve things out. And the reason for that is that the Parcel Fabric only works in a multi-editor use environment with branch versioning. It does not work with SDE. It doesn't understand what it is. It's meant for an enterprise deployment on a portal with branch versioning on there. Branch versioning is a much simpler, much more efficient way to go and manage versions, multiple people editing it, those sorts of things. So it requires Portal to go and be deployed where you're going to have more than one person editing it. Eventually, also, you will have to go and consider that it requires a Parcel Fabric user type. This isn't a big deal, but it is something that you have to make sure that you have in there. And make sure whoever you have helping you put this together and deploy, that they've done some research on what it actually costs, how to deploy it, those sorts of things. That Parcel Fabric user type just has to be deployed against your enterprise, and you're in good shape. Once you have one of the users doing that, you're fine. You don't need one for every single user, just one to allow it. All right, let's go back here. Let's keep exploring this. So inside of the Parcel Fabric object, all right, we have sort of whether or not the topology is enabled, the number of parcels for a build. A build is when it's going to analyze whether the rules are followed and how to go and follow them. The maximum number of parcels that can be associated with a single record. That's another setting in here. So those are all settings. Again, for the most part, you can leave the standards here. You want to pay attention to the version when you're creating it. When you create a version, by the way, when you create a Parcel Fabric, it automatically defaults to the version that is compatible with the release of ArcGIS Pro that you're using. And remember that. So if you want to go and stay at Enterprise 10.8.1, you want to be using ArcGIS Pro 2.7 on there when you create your Parcel Fabric. You cannot go backwards. You can go forward, but you can't go backwards. All right, parcel types. What is a parcel type? A parcel type is the type of parcel that you're going to be defining. Now remember, a parcel isn't necessarily just a tax parcel. A parcel is this grouping of a polygon, the lines defining that polygon, and the points defining the location of those lines. So we have inside of here 5 different parcel types. We have a section parcel type. We have a block parcel type, a parcel type, which is a tax parcel type, a lot parcel type, and a subdivision parcel type, right? And if we look at these, here are the feature classes that are all being watched and being controlled by this Parcel Fabric object. It is watching your polygon records feature class. It's watching those connection lines in here. It's watching the points. And this is a version 5, so it also watches adjustment points, adjustment lines, and adjustment vectors. That's one of the things that's in the release 5. It's watching the tax parcel polygon and the tax parcel lines, lot polygons, lot lines, block polygons, block lines, subdivision lines, section here. So it watches all of those and keeps track of those as you're going through and as you're doing this. So let's explore over here a little bit more, and let's look at topology, because it does have topology built in here. And if we look, it defines, here's the feature classes that take part in topology. And these are all the different feature classes in my file geodatabase inside my feature data set. And it tells me which of these are participating in my topology and what the ranking, both the XY ranking and the Z ranking are. Inside topology, the lower the number, the higher the ranking or higher priority, so that the rankings with number 1, everything gets moved towards those. All right. So again, here's the participants in the topology on here. And then here's the rules. Now, this is important. This is very important to understand this. So I'm going to go down and look at just my parcel rules here to here. And for every single parcel type inside of my Parcel Fabric, there are in fact 6 rules. The first rule is the lines have to have endpoints on the end of them. So at the end of each line has to be a point that will help to control where what it's connected to and such. So that has to do with point feature class and its relationship to the lines. The second rule is that the lines themselves can't have dangles. They have to be connected to something else. And that's an error if in fact it does not connect up. The second one is the lines themselves must not self-overlap. They have to be singular plane. They can't be on top of one another if it's the same line. You can have lines on top of one another, but it can't be the same line. It can't come back on itself. The next line rule is that it must not self-intersect. You can't have self-intersections in here. They actually have to be separate and discrete for your lines. The next line rule is that it has to be on the boundary of the area of the polygon for that parcel type. So it has to be on that area, and things like the line that's flashing in red right now, that's not on an area, so that's an error. You cannot have pure lines inside of a parcel fabric that are not connected to anything and not on top of anything. That's not a parcel. A parcel is a polygon, a line, and the corners. That's what should be in the parcel fabric. And then finally, on the polygons, we have one rule, and that says that the boundary has to have lines on it. All right? The boundary has to have lines on it. The boundary must be covered by lines. So you cannot have a polygon without a corresponding set of lines that document where those boundaries are. And these are standard types of rules. And these 6 rules define the structure of that parcel. And I often refer to these as being structural topology rules. But if you note, if you've been using parcels for a long time, one of the things, if you think about it, is that there's no rule here that says you can't have a gap. No rule that says you can't have overlaps between parcels. A lot of that is by design, because the parcel fabric is intending to be multiplanar or 3D. You're supposed to have parcels that can be on top of one another, because we have 3-dimensional tax parcels. We have condominiums, we have apartment buildings, we have things that stack on top of one another. And the parcel fabric is built to allow that. The same way with gaps, because we can go and separate out the different types of parcels that we're going and building. You don't necessarily need road parcels, which are normally the gaps between parcels and lots. You can have them on a separate layer and manage them more efficiently on that other layer. It doesn't have to be all in one polygon. All right, so again, the topology rules that are associated with a parcel fabric are structural topology. They are not dealing with how things are, whether things are contiguous to one another or whether things have gaps in them. It is purely, do we have the correct structure for that parcel? Polygon, lines, and points. That's what's needed. All right, so that is topology on here. And if you think about it, normally what will happen is people will go into the Parcel Fabric and start saying, okay, I've got to check my topology, thinking I've got to check to see whether I have overages, whether I have overlaps or gaps. This isn't going to do that. There are other tools inside the Parcel Fabric to do that, but not topology on here. This is the rules that are checked as part of this Parcel Fabric. And I'll show you, hopefully today, why you don't need topology. It's not as important in the fabric as it is on other simple feature classes. So let's explore this a little bit more. Those parcel types that we have in here in this Parcel Fabric, again, these are the parcel types. All right, we have parcels. These are tax parcels. Or we have blocks. These are blocks. Each of these parcel types has two different feature classes associated with it. It has the polygon feature class is associated with it and the line feature class. Those two feature classes define and allow you to go and track your parcels. But an interesting thing is that the Parcel Fabric, and let's go over here to explore one. When you bring in your Parcel Fabric into your table of contents, and I'm going to go and do this just to show you how it works. When you take a Parcel Fabric, when you're working with a Parcel Fabric and you have a Parcel Fabric, you don't go and select all of these and say, okay, let's drag them into your table of contents. Do not do that, because that will not configure the Parcel Fabric correctly. In order for the software to understand you have a Parcel Fabric and it has relationship classes, look at these relationship classes that the parcel, that the record polygon has block polygons associated with it. The record polygon has block lines. The record polygon has connections and lot lines. All these relationship classes, for them to work correctly, all right, for them to work the way it should work, the way to go and load a Parcel Fabric into ArcGIS Pro is to right-click on it and say, add it to, in this case, I'm going to add it to a new map and have it load. And when it loads this, it analyzes and says, oh, I'm a Parcel Fabric. I have certain types of parcel types associated with me. Those parcel types have a line and a polygon feature class, and I have points associated with it. I have records associated with it. I have all sorts of error features associated with it. I'm going to go and set up my table of contents correctly from the very beginning. It does at least separate these out so that, for example, it has a parcel type, or excuse me, a parcel polygon type, a tax parcel type. It has a group layer for it. That group layer includes lines, it includes polygons, and it includes historic and current lines and polygons, because the Parcel Fabric also tracks history. It's not just what's current, but it's also beginning to build an entire lineage of what did it look like at a certain time? What does it look like currently? And what did it look like before you did this transaction against it? So the Parcel Fabric tracks history on here as you're making edits. So let's go in here and look at what's going on here. And again, the gray symbology is when you first load it in, you then go in and you change the symbology and configure it for you. But let's look at this parcel polygon, parcel type, polygon, and line feature class, and how loading it into ArcGIS Pro separated it out. The first thing we want to do is we want to go and look at the line feature class. And if we go down to the properties of that line feature class, we will find that there's a definition query set against it. When we load a Parcel Fabric into ArcGIS Pro, it understands and sets a definition query for the current lines and for the historic lines. And they are defined by an attribute in the lines feature class that is called retired by. If there's a value in retired by, it means that it's no longer current. It has been retired. And that value is actually a global ID of the record that was used to go and make something historic. So these lines, these polygons inside these groups all have definition queries against them. So the current one says retired by is null. All right. The historic one definition query is retired is not null. All right. So we can go and see and determine whether or not the lines are current lines or historic lines. The same way with the polygons in here. We have the polygons for the tax parcel polygon type that they are retired by is null. Retired by record is null. And for my historic ones, it is retired by record is not null. Again, it's got some intelligence built in when you load it in. Make sure that you load it into ArcGIS Pro by dragging the Parcel Fabric object in. That way the software can interpret it and figure out what's going on there. That brings up a caution though. If in fact you are looking to go and give somebody a copy of your data and they're not using the Parcel Fabric, if you go and give them this feature class right here, this is the tax parcel type polygons on here. That feature class contains both current parcels and historic parcels. So you want to make sure that when you're exporting it out, when you're providing it to them, you tell them this has a retired by record attribute field on there. And let's go and just look at that on here. Let's look at this. There is, in fact, two attributes here, this retired by record and created by record. These fields are sort of the key to whether or not something is historic. Sam, I just saw you put something up here. The question was, do you load a Parcel Fabric from a service the same way? Yes. In fact, that's exactly the only way that you should ever load, either from a service and an enterprise deployment or from a file geodatabase. You should go to that service, right-click on the Parcel Fabric object and say, bring that into your current map or into a new map. And it will then automatically load it and it will separate it the way it's supposed to be. That's the only way for it to understand the logic of how to break down the structure of the Parcel Fabric. Yes, good question. Thank you. So loading it from the Parcel Fabric object, whether it's in a file geodatabase or whether it's a service, the same way, exact same way. So we're talking about these two attribute fields here. One is the retired by record, which we've been looking at, that says, yes, in fact, this marks whether or not something is current or historic. Every single feature class that's part of the Parcel Fabric has these two fields in there. The created by record, that's the record that stores the global ID. That's the attribute field that stores the global ID of the record that was used to create it. And this is the field that stores the global ID of the record that was used to retire it or mark it historic. All right, let's go back here. By the way, the difference between this and this, really the only difference is, and by the way, let's go in and set this up so that these have at least the same view. So I'm going to go, I've got two different maps in here. I'm going to go to View tab, and on here, go to Link and say center and scale these two maps so they have the same view. So now when I go over to here, I'm looking at exactly the same area. That's on the View tab. All right, so the only difference between this ArcGIS Parcel Fabric map and this map number 1 here is that I have gone in and symbolized, let's go reopen that, sorry. Reopen that. I have symbolized this map so that it symbolizes something that that's pleasantly, I can view at it and I understand what these things are on here. I've also configured it so it goes and highlights the attribute fields that I'm looking for. There's a lot of work involved in this. It's not major, but it's something that will enhance and make you more efficient if in fact you go and do that. All right, so what we've done is we've looked at the elements of the parcel fabric on here in the table of contents. So it goes and describes the actual parcel fabric, what we have in here. We've looked at the relationship classes. Let's see what else we have on here. We've looked at the topology rules, the parcel fabric rules. So we've also looked at determining what parcel fabric version we're actually working. So in order to do this, you right-click on the Parcel Fabric object, you go to General and expand this, and it will show you what version and what the compatible releases are, and give you some other statistics on it on here. If in fact you go and have an older version of the Parcel Fabric, in order to create a newer version of it, there's a geoprocessing tool called an upgrade data set. All right. And you just want to make sure that you're careful whether or not it's on an enterprise or desktop. You want to make sure you're using the compatible software to go and edit it correctly on there for you. So before we go further, let's go and explore it a little bit. We've got about 12 minutes left in this hour. Let's explore this a little bit, how this all works. All right, by the way, I'm in 2.9. When you have a parcel fabric loaded in your table of contents, you get a special parcel tab. I should mention to you, you can only have one parcel fabric object in a table of contents at a time. You can have multiple map documents open up with multiple parcel fabrics in. We've actually had some clients deploy it that way, in which they'll have their cadastral data, their tax-related data, tax parcels, subdivision lots, roads, easements in one parcel fabric, and they'll have the sectional information in a sectional survey state. They'll have the townships, the sections, the ranges, the quarter sections, those sorts of things in a separate parcel fabric. And the reason why they do that is that the surveying and engineering department takes care of the sectional information, and the property mappers, they take care of the cadastral information. So it has much more flexibility in there. Other components on here, for example, we now have a great deal of flexibility for what attribute fields we have in here. In this case, for example, we have by default, it comes with a name field, but these fields here were actually all part of this county's standard type of naming procedure. So we didn't have to abandon them. We included those attributes in here together with, these are the standard Parcel Fabric tools. Here's some standard Parcel Fabric attribute fields are here. Here's also some other standard Parcel Fabric attribute fields. So there's flexibility in the deployment. You can design your own. You're still going to have to carry some required fields, but you can design what your data structure looks like. And that's for each of the various parcel types. You can have one schema for your parcels, one for your lots, one for your blocks, one for your subdivisions. You can have a different schema for every parcel type that you deploy. All right. So again, about 9 minutes left here. Let's go and talk about what this really is. So I'm on parcels. I'm actually starting editing. There's my start and disable parser. I have this thing called a heads-up display. And this heads-up display actually goes and shows me and is an interface into my record polygon. And I can tell it I want to create a record polygon. And the record polygon can have a name. It can have a record type. None of these fields are required. The only thing that's required is some sort of name. It doesn't have to necessarily be a structure, but the individual organization that's doing the Parcel Fabric determines all of this. How are you going to name your records? All right. And then do you want some sort of way to differentiate between records? What's the recorded date? That sort of thing. In this case, I'm just going to do a simple default. It timestamps it and says, this is the record that was created by Frank on today at this time. I want to go and illustrate what this is going to do. While I have an active record, this is called a heads-up display, by the way, and it shows me that I have something that's going to go and track what I do. And as I go and create this record, let's go over here to my attributes for my line. And if I scroll down, I can see there is a created by record here, and it's being populated automatically by, and it has in there, that's actually the global ID of the record that I created and that I'm tracking. So if I go in my records table, and I don't have that displayed right now, I'm going to go and display it. And I need to save that edit if I am done. So if I go in here and tell it to go and display my global ID, all right. Now when I open up this attribute table, there's my global ID. And if I go to the very bottom, which is the last record I've got right now, that right there, that's the same value that's getting stored into my lines. That right there, that's my global ID of the record polygon, and it's tracking it. So that as I go in here and I say, okay, let's go and add some more line here, parcel line, and let's add another line and another line and another line. All right, and let's go and select those 4 lines. Let's make sure this is working correctly. We go in here and we check those 4 lines. Every one of them has that same value on here. Here, 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 here. They all have that same value of what was the polygon that was used to, that's related to the record. What is the global ID of the record that's keeping track of all this stuff? That's the first thing it does, is keep track of it. And then as we move forward, there is a function in here that says, I'm ready to build a polygon. This create seeds is actually going to go through and analyze those lines that are basically tracked by the current record. Check all the lines and look at the created by record value. And if they match the current record, analyze them and tell me, do they form a closed polygon? If they form a closed polygon, signify by creating what's called a seed polygon. Now, the seed polygon goes in, it's not a full polygon, it's the beginning of a polygon. If you think back, one of the rules is that the polygon has to be defined by the lines that are associated with it. The polygon has to have lines in it. Now, what this next step is going to do is it's going to go through and analyze all the rules. And again, to remind you what the rules are, the lines have to have points on the ends of them. It's going to analyze every line that's associated with this record, say, does it have a point on the end of it? If it does not, it's going to create one. It's going to analyze the lines to make sure there's no undershoots or overshoots. Actually, an overshoot is fine. That they don't self-intersect, that they, all that. It's then also going to analyze and make sure that those lines are on top of a polygon. It's then going to analyze the polygon and say, does this polygon have lines on the external portion of it? That's what the build is. This build is going to look at this record and look at everything that shares the same global ID. So when I click on build, it will now go through and analyze. And now I'm going to look at my heads up display. I'm going to say, select everything that's associated with this record. And it's going to give me, once I'm here, it's going to tell me that I have 4 points, I have 4 lines, and I have 1 polygon on here associated with this record. That is the function of the Parcel Fabric, what it does. I'm going to experiment a little bit more. We got a couple more minutes here. I'm now going to go and create, instead of creating lines, I'm going to create a parcel, a polygon. And in that polygon, I have an active record. So it's going to go and use that same global ID. It's going to use the global ID of the active record. And now I don't have to say, check to see whether the lines form a polygon, whether the lines are closed, because I don't have lines. But I'm going to say, not create seeds, I'm going to say build it. Evaluate the polygon, which is tagged with this record, to see whether it matches the rules. So I'm going to tell it, go ahead and build it. It's going to check, do I have lines? If not, it's going to build lines. It's going to check, do those lines have points on them? If they do not, it's going to build them. So now I can say, build this out. And sure enough, it will build it. And now if I go and say, show me everything associated with my current record, all right, it's going to tell me now that I have 8 points associated with it. I have 8 lines and I have 2 polygons associated with this current record. One more quick thing in here before we go for the day. I'm going to say, I'm going to do a trick now. What happens if I turn off my record so it's no longer tracking me? Right? And I go in here and I say, I want to build some lines now. And these lines, I'm going to connect up to here. All right, going to connect all those lines up. I'm done connecting the lines. Let's turn the record on again and say, let's go ahead and create seeds. And it's going to analyze everything that's tagged with those created by records. If I look at these lines, and let's look here, those lines. If I look down here, there's nothing is tagged as being created by record. So we'll not use those in the analysis to go and build the polygons. However, if I go in here and I say, assign those to there, if you watched over here, suddenly all of these lines have that same global ID. I can then go in here and say, create a seed from my lines that are assigned to this. And I can say build. That is the essence of the Parcel Fabric. All right. Next ArcGIS Parcel Fabric workshop, we're going to really explore records, what they're doing, how they're working, how do they handle lines, all of that. And that's going to be next month. So hopefully you'll join us back there again. Hopefully you got something out of today's session. All right. And hopefully you enjoyed it. I'm going to stop the recording. Thanks for attending, and we hope you enjoyed this workshop. If you have questions, would like some more details about anything we discussed during this workshop, or if you or anyone at your organization would like information about training, support, or ways in which we can help you with your GIS needs, please contact me at frank@pandaconsulting.com or call me at 561-691-3277, and we can discuss how we can help you with your needs.